In major Tower Defense Simulator news, the developers have recently just posted the roadmap, the public roadmap for updates in Tower Defense Simulator. They have recently posted it for Alter Ego as well, but given that Tower Defense Simulator is currently, at the moment, the bigger game, this is major news. Now, I'm not going to cover literally everything here. There are two things I want to spoil out so that they are in different videos. So for example, there is a Frost mode that Below Natural or Tyler has put it here, and there's also Golden mode, which it should be obvious what these refer to, but there is some speculation on both Frost mode and Golden mode, which I want to talk about in a different video. So for now, in this video, they do just get a mention, and given the fact that Frost mode is coming out in Q4 of 2025, it seems. It does seem something that's pertinent to talk about right now, but that'll be the next video after this because they are separate game modes and they're not related to anything else that's seen off here. And of course, everything here is subject to change. Nothing here is 100% confirmed, although it is probably likely if it's shown off here, especially the closer it is to the release date. So obviously, firstly, we have the Null and Void event, which has been shipped, as stated here through the label, because obviously, in the recent times, and in fact right now still, the Null and Void event is still going on, although the event probably ends next week. So if you are missing some stuff from it, like logbooks or like crates, the band crates for example, then make sure you hop onto that. There is no suggestion of a 5th band crate here, which does suggest that when the developers mentioned a 5th band skin, it was likely a typo and they only meant 4 band skins, or that band skin was cancelled. The developers also mentioned that there would be more Halloween live events for this year, in which where you would get the band crates, the 2 missing band crates that the developers had added to Tower Defense Simulator. However, given the fact that all of the nights have been released and there were no live events for this, like the developers had promised, and there is no mention of live events in the Trello update board, it looks like that this has been cancelled and is no longer going to happen. And given that there is no mention of live events for the Christmas event, we have to assume that maybe the developers don't want to do any more live events, given the fact that they probably take up a lot of resources. But it does boost the CCU of Tower Defense Simulator, although with that being said, I think the second live event didn't have that many players in comparison to the first live event. The first live event had about 160,000 players playing it, whereas the second live event only had 120,000 players, which is still a lot and obviously much higher than average on what Tower Defense Simulator should be getting, but the fact that live events aren't mentioned anymore should probably indicate that maybe the developers don't want to do any more live events, or they're going to be much less often than they were, or than they originally planned to be in the Halloween 2025, because it looks like there was going to be every other week for the updates, but also the 4th of October and the 11th of October. So who knows what the status of these live events are going to be. Next, the developers mention Winter 2025 event, labels being on track and information coming soon. The developers have mentioned this Winter 2025 event previously on Twitter. It is through this tweet on the 11th of November, an Ice Cube, which many people have speculated could be about the winter event, and from this many people have speculated that it's the case where there could be a Sledger rework, an Elf Camp Tower rework, but it's most likely a reference to the winter event, as we know, is coming. The thing is, an ice cube could mean a whole lot of things. Many people speculated that this could be referring to the Frost Spirit, for example, rather than a return of, say, Santa Bot. The thing is, though, an ice cube is so vague that I don't want to read too much into it, so who knows on what could be returning. Like, given the past events, Krampus could return, but Krampus has already returned twice already, so for it to return a 3rd time would be unprecedented. I know some enemies have returned more than twice, like Jax for example, but a boss returning more than twice seems a little bit excessive. Then again though, Ducky Doom did technically return 3 times. So we have the first iteration in 2020, then we have the second iteration in 2022, but that was seen as Nerd recreating Ducky Doom, and then the third iteration, Ducky Doom the Third, in the recent 2025 event, Ducky Revenge event, that was seen to be like the Nerd Duck rebuilding Ducky Doom again. So technically speaking, there's been 3 iterations of the Ducky Doom enemy, but when it comes to the Nerd Duck rebuilding it, it's only been twice. So if Krampus were to return again, then I don't know how the developers would spin it to make sure it's within the lore of Tower Defense Simulator. I mean, after all, the last time that an enemy returned was actually the last event. In that event, Krampus wasn't, no, for the Frost Spirit returned to Outpost 32. It actually just retconned the previous Frost Spirit and Outpost 32 event from 2021. So I guess that it's not within the lore that Krampus has returned by the Children of Exo, but given that Lord Exo has been unleashed, I guess there's going to be some sort of new enemy. I mean, to be fair, Lord Exo was looking down upon the village in the events where Santa Bot appeared in Cold Ambush for like the elves and stuff, so perhaps it could be a return of that, but I'm not sure if the developers would add new enemies or new bosses to that event. Obviously, we have Frost mode here, a harder endgame game mode offering difficulty beyond Fallen. We'll talk about this in a separate video alongside Golden mode because that's very interesting. New shop UI, we've seen, well, not really seen it, we've actually seen the new inventory UI, which I've talked about in the previous video. The new shop UI, I did speculate in that previous video and said that it was very likely that they would rework it, and I mean, next day they confirmed it. So yeah, my predictions are often very correct. Now, the biggest news story that comes out of this roadmap is the Tesla Tower. Here, it says it's delayed, and on Discord, the developers said that the Tesla Tower has been delayed from its originally planned November launch, which was originally delayed from its September launch. November will also be a lighter month as we focus on getting everything ready for December. We appreciate your understanding and can't wait to share what's coming. Obviously, the developers have their hands full with the winter event or the Christmas event, and they had their hands full with the Halloween event, so it's very likely that the Tesla Tower is going to be delayed until 2026 from the looks of things. It might be released towards the end of 2025 as like the last update, but it looks very likely that the developers have delayed it until 2026, January at the earliest. But in light of this, the developers have leaked some developmental images because the only image that we've seen is actually just the max level in a render. Here we can see the developmental images of the Tesla Tower, although this isn't confirmed to be the final images for the Tesla Tower, going from what looks like level 0 to 1, 2, 3 and 4. It looks like there's going to be 4 levels to this, 5 if you include level 0. Now, many people speculated that it's only level 4 that looks like it attacks towers because of this Tesla coil. I don't know if that's going to be the case. It looks like there is some like attacking capability with its sensor here, so not sure if it's going to be something similar to the electroshocker, but in the description for this, the developers mentioned that it is a evergreen intermediate tower filling a higher damage archetype with an active ability to help even better in game modes like Fallen, which is very interesting because Fallen game modes, they have enemies with stun immunity, so I do wonder if the Tesla Tower could perhaps have an ability which slows down enemies with no stun, including bosses, which would be very interesting. And there's been like a cardinal rule in Tower Defense Simulator where you don't mess around with the immunities that are given to bosses because it will just mess up the game's mechanics and mess up the balancing in Tower Defense Simulator. Also, it mentions an active ability, so it looks like if you place it down, the enemies surrounding the Tesla Tower may be slowed down rather than the Tesla Tower dealing damage while also slowing down enemies, similar to the electroshocker. This is sort of similar to the Medic's active ability, which helps shield towers from getting stunned once in a period of time. That's an active ability because you don't need to select an ability to do that, but you do have to select towers to do that, and the medic itself does have an ability which if you select it, it gives a damage boost out to the towers that it boosts. So we'll just have to see if Tesla Tower is very similar to that or if it's going to be a proper active ability. The developers mentioned that it's an evergreen intermediate tower, meaning that it's going to be alongside the likes of the Freezer, Assassin Tower, Shotgunner Tower, but the fact that it's alongside the Assassin Tower does make me believe that it's going to be a easier version or a dumbed down version of the electroshocker, much like how the Assassin Tower is technically speaking a dumbed down version of the Warden Tower, which is an advanced tower, and the Tesla Tower is going to be a dumbed down version of the electroshocker as an intermediate tower going from an advanced tower. But then again though, many people would probably consider the Assassin Tower to be much better than the Warden seen off here. The Warden itself, it's not that bad, but it's certainly been power crept by a lot of other towers, including the Assassin Tower. The Assassin Tower may not be as good as the Warden at max level, but certainly when you think about cost efficiency, the Warden is not as good or nowhere near as good as the Assassin Tower. And I do wonder if the developers are going to modify the electroshocker in any way so that it doesn't occupy the niche of the Tesla Tower too much, given the fact that the Tesla Tower is set to deal higher damage, but also mentions that it will slow down towers, which is exactly the same thing that the electroshocker does right now. Next, in the first quarter of 2026, the developers also mention a hardcore rework. Now, this has been long overdue. Many people would think that this would come out in 2025, and in fact, I believe in one of the update logs in Tower Defense Simulator at the start of 2025, the developers said that there will be a hardcore rework this year. So it looks like then it does say on track here, but I guess that was just speculation from the developers at the start of the year. So it looks like the developers will be releasing it within like March of 2026, the hardcore rework, which means that there are probably going to be new enemies, and some old enemies from hardcore mode will be removed, given the fact that all of those enemies are basically legacy enemies. So if you are missing some logbooks from the original hardcore mode, the current hardcore mode that we have in the game right now, then today, until the start of 2026, it's probably a good time to grind those logbooks out. Now obviously, there are some very hard logbooks to get in those, including the Health Cultist. The Health Cultist is an enemy which only appears once in hardcore mode, has 8,000 health, so it doesn't even take advantage of the 15% drop rate that some enemies in hardcore mode has, like the Molten Boss, and in fact the Molten Boss doesn't even 100,000 health. So the Health Cultist is a really hard enemy to get. I'd reckon it's like a 1% chance of getting it through natural spawning, and it is more likely than not that you'll have to get it through pity kills. Except for me, I actually got this through random chance when the odds were 3 times lower, interestingly enough. And again, because people will point this out, you can't use Scholar to boost the Health Cultist's logbooks drop rates. The Scholar skill barely boosts it anyway by 20%, so you're going from like 1% to 1.2%, barely anything. But additionally, skills are disabled in hardcore mode, so even if you have max Scholar skill, it has absolutely no effect on whether you get the Health Cultist or not. It's absolutely useless. But speaking of skills, the developers did mention that they may enable skills in hardcore mode when skills were first enabled, and then they were disabled for hardcore mode because it just made hardcore mode slightly too easy. I'd imagine hardcore mode would allow for the use of skills, but would also allow for the use of consumables, because when consumables were first added, they were disabled in hardcore mode, and the developers did mention that in the hardcore mode rework, they may allow for the use of consumables. Although that being said, we don't know if the developers will do that, given that in hard mode for events, they don't allow consumables. And hard modes for events are typically not as hard as hardcore mode itself, so who knows if the developers are actually willing to enable consumables in hardcore mode, unless they make like an easy version of hardcore mode which allows for the use of skills and consumables, and a hard version of hardcore mode which doesn't allow for their use. Now, after the hardcore rework update, and the things listed here aren't necessarily going to be in update order, the next thing listed here is in economy update. So there's going to be a new currency. Jesus Christ, they are pronouncing a lot of things new here. So Chroma is a new currency centered around cosmetic progression. It will be used for crafting skins, purchasing items in the daily shop, interacting with future cosmetic features, skin quantities and crafting. Skins will now have quantity counts, letting players collect and stack duplicates. This was a thing in the past in Tower Defense Simulator. There was duplicate skins, and the developers did have a plan to have something very similar to this. However, things fell through and duplicate crates were removed in 2021, I believe, finally, for the basic crates. Here though, it says these duplicates could be used as materials in the crafting system to create new skins, giving every skin drop additional value and expanding long-term cosmetic progression. So they would be probably something very similar to unusual skins that were seen in Arsenal, and what they were originally planned to do when they were first added, when duplicate skins were first added, sorry, in 2020. I probably do have a video somewhere in the works about unusual skins, and I should probably release that sometime in the future, given that there is going to be an economy update which allows for skin crafting. But that will be a separate video. In addition to this, we now have map difficulty reward scaling, so map rewards will scale with map difficulty. I did actually mention this to the developers all the way back in 2020. Back then, I made a couple of suggestions to the developers, including having dynamic tower limits based on the amount of players in a server. And in fact, the developers basically used my idea one-to-one. I said solo should have 40 towers, duo should have 30 towers, trio should have 25 towers, quad should have 20 towers, and anything above that, mega servers, they should only have like 16 towers. And I think the developers implemented that one-for-one. I also suggested back then that more difficult maps, should have higher rewards, and the developers said that they may implement it or not, and it looks like finally after 6 years they actually might implement this, so very cool. Just as an aside, some maps, they do have additional rewards, but that's only because of the modifiers that are applied to those. So for example, Mason Arch, it has a modifier which boosts rewards by 10%, that's being the all pass modifier. This all pass modifier allows enemies to spawn in twice basically on a map apart from major bosses. So for example, if there was a game mode which spawned in 6 abnormals, because there are 2 paths here with the all paths modifier applied, there would be 12 abnormals that spawned in total rather than 6, which could just be split across the 2 paths. Typically speaking, 2-path maps with all path modifiers, basically duplicating the amount of enemies, is considered to be slightly harder than usual maps, hence why these maps have 10% rewards. However, not all insane maps has this, so for example, Lay-By, I think is considered at the very least it's considered a hard map, it's actually considered an insane map. That doesn't have boosted rewards because map difficulty scaling doesn't exist. So with this implementation at the start of 2026, it does look like they may add this finally. Then rounding off Q1 of 2026, PvP Season 1, which is very pertinent because PvP Season 0 has ended recently. This season ended all the way back at the start of October, and the developers said that Season 0 was basically just a pilot season for PvP mode to see how people actually received the rewards. And I must say, it looks like not that many players actually warmed to the idea, and sometimes it would show up the counter for the amount of people playing PvP mode. After the season ended, barely anyone plays PvP mode now, and sometimes people playing sandbox mode exceeds the amount of people playing PvP mode, which is very interesting. And I probably consider it now not as much as a failure as it was previously, because I don't think anyone played PvP mode back in 2020, but certainly it's not been the roaring success that the developers had hoped it could be. And clans here, I don't think is even mentioned in the roadmap, so who knows the future of clans in Tower Defense Simulator. Now, when it comes to Season 1, I would speculate that there's probably going to be more PvP skins that are added to this season compared to previously, because the developers did mention that the rewards were kinda, well, lesser of quality. There were a bunch of name tags and a bunch of emotes and stickers because it was more of a testing season rather than anything else. So one would have to assume that there would be more skins implemented, but I can't confirm that for sure. But certainly, even though the PvP mode looks like it's going from the beta to full release, I'm not sure if people will be playing PvP mode, especially if the developers don't really get a grip on how the reward system works for the new PvP season. If it's still going to be based on your rank in ELO in PvP mode, then it's going to be a bit of a shit show, and people would find ways to exploit it, very similar to how win trading existed when it came to PvP mode for ranked matches, just so that people could get all of the rewards, which I also abuse, I can't lie. Now we move on to Q2 of 2026, and these have a change tag. They are purple, which means planned rather than on track. It looks like when it comes to the on track stuff, it looks like the developers may have like an idea on them and they're actually currently implementing them, but for planned stuff, it may not have been added yet. So firstly, Q2 of 2026, a story mode. This may be the game mode where the developers add all of the events from the Hexscape event to the current Null and Void event and likely Winter 2025 event. The developers, or well, Below Natural, mentioned this on Twitter that he might implement these events in 2026, and it's very likely that this is going to be the story mode that he mentions here. So that does mean that if you're missing any logbooks from the events, such as the Frostspawner in my case, then you are actually able to get this logbook through this. But there are still going to be some missing logbooks, since it doesn't look like they're going to add the live event, so that's the Corrupted Conserver and the Mechanical Rot. It doesn't look like they'll re-add those. Next we have Golden Mode, which is, I've already said that it's going to be a separate video, but it looks like that's going to be coming in the Q2 of 2026. Now next, after that, we have Tower Evolutions, which very interesting, since this is like the Evolved Towers idea, and I don't think the developers are going to implement it from one-to-one what we've seen in 2020 or what they had planned in 2020. But Tower Evolutions coming in Q2 of 2026 means that this is a feature that's 6 years in the making, and I'm not sure if it's going to replace golden skins entirely now, as it was the case in 2020. But the fact that Tower Evolutions has been mentioned probably makes me think that the developers acknowledge its existence now, and they may add it in the future in 2026, although it could be delayed further, or it may just be a separate feature, not actually listed under the original Evolved Towers idea, such as the Juggernaut for the Minigun Tower. And after that, they do mention a tower coming in Q2 of 2026, meaning that sometime between May and about July, we should expect a new tower. Although with that being said, if it's anything like the Tesla tower, it may be delayed until Q3 of 2026. Here we see that there's going to be community game modes, so maybe that's game modes where the community makes it up, similar to how the community were meant to make game modes for sandbox mode, but this was never implemented, so who knows what they mean by that. And a new tower coming in Q3 of 2026, so next year at the very least it looks like there are going to be 2 new evergreen towers, maybe 3 if the Tesla tower is actually delayed to 2026. And of course, this goes a year in advance, so we have Q4 of 2026, so there's obviously going to be an event for Halloween 2026 and a winter event of 2026. The developers looks like they have these planned well in advance this time. Interestingly enough though, there is no mention of a Easter event if 2026 in Q2. Very interesting, because usually, like every other year, there has been an Easter event. Last year, or this year actually, there has been an Easter event, so current projections would dictate that there wouldn't be an Easter event next year, which is why it's not mentioned here. But then again, everything here is subject to change, and obviously not everything listed here is going to be everything that's going to be added to Tower Defense Simulator. More things are very likely to be added, including some reworks, including of maybe the Shotgunner Tower, as mentioned previously, or maybe even the Assassin Tower, as mentioned in the polls in Tower Defense Simulator Discord. So, not everything here is confirmed, and not everything here is going to be the only things added to Tower Defense Simulator, but it's a very good idea of what to see in the future. But also, watch this space, because Out of Bears and Below Natural have talked quite a bit about future updates in Tower Defense Simulator on Discord and Twitter, which isn't mentioned in the roadmap, but that's a separate video for another time.